Hello, gamers, pre-meds, undergraduates. It's your host, Down to Win. And today it is Saturday, 4:28 p.m. And we got, let's take a look. Yesterday we did a lot of flashcards, like almost 800. Actually 800 to be exact. Yeah, 800 exactly, on the dot. So I guess we'll just spend a couple minutes just going over what has been happening this week. So I went over pretty much BB, CP, BB and CP flashcards for the entire week, and I got through a lot. I'd say. I'm hoping I can get I can finish this in about 2 more weeks for BB and CP. But in the meantime, I'm also going to be start tackling my psychology flashcards because, as you can see, I have 82 new flashcards I just added today. Went from 8 to 11:30ish, or sorry, 8:30 to 11:30. I'm doing the Khan Academy CP document, PS document, which I'm sure all you guys are aware of. I'll just open up real quick over here. So I've just been reading it, and my current thought process is that I'm going to be reading the 100-page doc first time through, and then referring back to the 300-page doc over here on small points in this document that are really vague or difficult to grasp. And if that doesn't work, I watched a video, and if that doesn't work, I have all the TBR and Kaplan and TPR books at my desk, so I refer back to those. And I got through about 10 pages on this 100-page doc. So I went from page 30 to 40, which is 50 pages on the actual 300-page document. So pretty good stuff, and 82 cards made. So with all that said, we're gonna jump right into it. This will probably be a very long video because by the time this video is done, I want to be absolutely done with psychology. That's the goal today, just grind through psychology. So without further ado, let's begin, pre-meds. Oh, gotta sip, hold on. I wish I can show you guys my setup right now. I've got the iPad playing music, and I got some of my study drinks going on here. Some caffeinated drinks to keep me up. Alright. Here we go. The information processing model assumes that our brain has a limited storage capacity and serial processing. However, the human brain has capacity for parallel processing as well. I gotta do that again. What is emotional intelligence? It's in how well you're able to communicate with other people and get an emotional feel for other people. Close enough. Where are taste buds located? In the papillate. And structures called taste buds, which are made from the papillate or something. Papillae. Contain structures called papillae. Light enters through the blank and goes into blank, which contains blank. Light enters through the pupils and goes into the retina, which contains rods and cones. Light enters through the pupil, goes to the retina, which contains rods and cones. Law of past experiences. States that I totally forgot. Visual stimuli care guys going to past experiences. For example, culture proceeds red to mean stop and green to mean go because of stoplights. Visual stimuli are categorized according to past experiences. For example, our culture perceives red to mean stop and green to mean go. What is the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion? Behavior is driven by central and peripheral info, meaning it is driven by the quality of the argument by the persuader. Then this is the persuader. Behavior is driven by central and peripheral info, meaning it's driven by the quality of the argument, the persuader, the attractiveness of the persuader. The blind spot in our eye is the location where I think it's something meets something, where the optic nerve connects to the retina since there's no rods and cones there. What is the organ of Corti? I totally forgot everything. Contains the basilar membrane and the tectorial membrane and hair cells. Organ of Corky contains the basilar membrane and the tectorial membrane in hair cells. Four major categories of stressors: significant life changes, catastrophic events, daily hassles, and ambient stressors such as pollution, noise, and crowds. Significant life changes, catastrophic events, daily hassles, and ambient stressors. Cornea is the part of the eye transparent, bends light in the first part of the eye that light hits as cornea. Elaboration likelihood model persuasion says that behavior is driven by cognitive and peripheral components. Behavior is driven by the attractiveness of the persuader and the argument of the persuader. Central meaning is driven by the quality argument. What are the 5 components of language? Phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. Phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. 5 components of language: phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. Now I forgot what all those mean. Phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. Phonology, morphology, semantics. I wish there's a way to memorize this. Phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. What is a sleep stage cycle? Let's see. Our body goes through routine sleep cycles during sleep. We go through N1, N2, N3, and REM sleep. And we cycle through those, and each one takes about an hour and 30 minutes or 90 minutes. Cool. What is the opponent process theory of color vision? The opponent process theory of color vision states that our cones detect RGBY, and the colors will overpower each other to produce a new color or something like that. Only one color can dominate. Cone perceives 4 colors: red, green, blue, and yellow. Only one color. I think I'm gonna put everything as again, mainly because I haven't gone over these flashcards in a very long time, and I'll just redo basically everything. What do opiates and opioids do? What do opiates and opioids do? I have no idea. Opiates and opioids. Opiates and opioids. They're vasodilators. They decrease your central nervous function and use to treat pain and anxiety. They're vasodilators. They decrease your central nervous system function and can be used to treat pain and anxiety. Vasodilators decrease your central nervous function. What are the 4 hemispheres of the cerebral cortex and what are their functions? Frontal, temporal, frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal cortex. Frontal lobe is the motor cortex and prefrontal cortex and Broca's area. Parietal lobe contains somatosensory cortex and spatial processing. Occipital is vision and striatum, and temporal cortex is sound and Wernicke's area. Frontal lobe, Broca's area for sure, motor cortex, prefrontal cortex. Parietal lobe is somatosensory cortex and spatial processing. Parents are aware of their space, maybe. Occipital lobe is vision and striatum cortex, and temporal cortex is sound, Wernicke's area. Semantic networks. Concepts are organized in your mind as connected ideas, and related ideas are connected closely together. Concepts are organized in your mind as connected ideas, and related ideas are connected closely together. Semantic networks. Concepts are organized in your mind as connected ideas, and related ideas are connected closely together. The magnocellular pathway. I think this was spatial processing. High temporal region uses detect motion. Primary components are temporal resolution. High temporal resolution uses detect motion. Magnocellular motion, and primary component is rods. What are 2 types of cues that can direct our attention? Exogenous external cues and endogenous internal cues. Exogenous external cues and endogenous internal cues. What is distal stimuli? Distal stimuli are stimuli that, um, I think these are stimuli that don't actually interact with our senses. For example, tree. Right. What are the four hemispheres of the cerebral cortex? The four hemispheres of the cerebral cortex. We have the parietal, frontal lobe, which is the prefrontal cortex and motor cortex and Broca's area. And we have the parietal lobe, which is where so we have spatial processing, and there's another one, parietal lobe. I don't remember. Parietal lobe, spatial processing. I forgot the other one. Occipital lobe is vision and striation. It looks like a striated cortex. And temporal lobe, or temporal cortex, is sound and Wernicke's area. Somatosensory cortex. Parents can feel everything and see anything. They are basically divine beings. Okay. Lazarus theory. Experience and emotion depends on how the situation is cognitively labeled. Based on cultural differences. How we depict emotion depends on how the situation is labeled via cultural differences. Emotions are temporary, can be positive or negative, and vary in intensity. Emotions are involuntary. Optic disc. They are proteins, structures found inside rods, and they fire action potential to the brain. They are structures found inside rods, and they fire action potential to the brain. What are the otolithic organs? The otolithic organs are organs that utricle-saccule inside the semicircular canal allows it to detect linear acceleration and head positioning. Utricle and saccule inside allows it to detect linear acceleration and head positioning. Utricle and saccule inside the semicircular allows it to detect linear acceleration, head positioning. Acceleration, head positioning. Okay. Four hemispheres of the cerebral cortex. The frontal lobe contains the motor cortex and prefrontal cortex and Broca's area. Parietal lobe contains the somatosensory cortex and the spatial processing. Occipital lobe contains vision and striation. It's a striated cortex. And temporal lobe is a place for sound, and Wernicke's area. The information processor assumes that our brain has a limited capacity and we do serial processing, when in reality we actually do parallel processing too. Why does the fluid in the ear only flow in one direction? Because the organ of Corti separates the cochlea into two sections, upper and lower membrane. The organ of Corti separates the cochlea into two sections, upper and lower membrane. Taste buds are located in structures called papillae. Why does light hit more cones at the fovea and less at the periphery? At the fovea, there is no axon in the way of light, so the cones get a lot of light. At the periphery, light goes through bundles of axons, so some energy is lost. At the fovea, there are no axons in the way, so light comes, so the cones get lots. Light enters through the pupil and goes into light enters through the cones and goes into the light enters through the pupil and goes into the retina, which contains rods and cones. Law of past experiences states that we detect visual stimuli based on our past experiences. For example, we interpret red as being stop because we see stoplights, and we interpret green as go because of stoplights too. Divided attention. I forgot this one. Individual must perform two tasks which requires attention simultaneously. Divided attention, so like multitasking. The blind spot in our eye is where the optic nerve connects to the retina, because there's no rods and cones there. What is the organ of Corti? The organ of Corti contains the basilar membrane, tectorial membrane, and a bundle of hair cells. So brain structure, we use brain structure, MRI and PET scans. No. Brain structure, we use PET scans. See, CAT scans and MRI scans. Brain function, we use EEGs, electrocardiograms, and MEGs. And we use fMR and PET scans combined with CAT and MRI. Works by injecting glucose into the cell and seeing which area of the brain is more active at a point in time. I think I'm going to put this as, or quickly change it to one new, just so I can focus on getting through these newer cards. Or these older cards, sorry. What are the four main categories of stressors? So we have... categories. I'm the category. Oh, these are the categories. Okay. We have significant life changes, catastrophic events, daily hassles, and ambient stressors, pollution, noise, and crowd. Cornea. It's the first part of the light that hits, the first part of the eye that light hits, and it bends light. The five components of language: we have phonology, morphology, semantics, pragmatics, and morphology, phonology, semantics, morphology, pragmatic. Phonology, morphology, semantics, phonology, morphology, semantics, pragmatics, and I'll look at the other one. Syntax. One of the major emotional response of stress is depression. Guess on that. Opponent process theory of color vision states that we have the cones detect RGBY, so red, green, blue, yellow, and only one color can dominate at a time. What is the labeled line model of taste buds? The labeled line model of taste buds. Labeled line model of taste buds states that we labeled line model of taste buds. Totally forgot this one. Each taste bud receptor has 5 axons, all of which send separate taste information to different parts of the gustatory taste cortex. Each taste bud has 5 axons for the 5 tastes, all of which send separate taste information to different parts of the gustatory taste cortex. Vasodilators depresses your central nervous system and reduces anxiety. What is the elaboration likelihood model for persuasion? Behavior is dependent on, what was it? Peripheral and peripheral and something, but basically, your behavior is influenced by the argument of the persuader and the attractiveness of the persuader. Central peripheral info. Cool. What is vigilance, attention, and signal detection? Processes that detect a signal or allowing responses to be prime. In other words, having prime responses to allow for quick action in response to a signal. Vigilance, attention, signal detection. Having prime responses to allow for quick action in response to a signal. What are semantic networks? It's a way we categorically organize ideas. The closer networks, two ideas are more close. Two close connected ideas are more closely networked together. What is a magnocellular pathway? It is involved in temporal detection or temporal processing and motion, and the primary component is rods. What are the two types of cues? So we have exogenous internal cues or exogenous external cues and endogenous internal cues. Distal stimuli are stimuli that are distal stimuli are stimuli such as trees, drinks, or computers that don't directly interact with our sensory receptors. Syntax: how words are put together in a sentence. The channels are kept open, the rods are turned on. So when cGMP is bound to the sodium channels are kept open, this keeps the rod on. If phosphodiesterase is present, then cGMP is converted to GMP, which would decrease the CMGP concentration. This leads to the closing of the sodium channels, which keeps the rods off. Consciousness: awareness of ourself and environment. Lazarus' theory states that I forgot what he said. Emotions depend on how the situation is appraised based on cultural and differences. Experience of emotion depends on how the situation is cognitively appraised, and how we label events is based on cultural individual differences. Emotions are temporary and can be positive or negative and are involuntary. Optic discs are proteins that are found in rods that actually send signal to the brain. Mayor Friedman and Ray Rosenman experiment that tests notion that stress is associated with heart disease. People who had heart diseases were mostly people who were angry. Experiment to test notion that stress is associated with increased heart disease. People who had heart disease were mostly people who were angry. Experiment to test notion that stress is associated with increased heart disease. People who had heart disease were mostly people who were angry. Oleic organ contains the utricle and the saccule, which are part of a semicircular canal, and the oleic is involved in linear acceleration and head positioning. Early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. I forgot what was it. Difficulty remembering recent events, loss of short-term memory for Alzheimer's. Difficulty remembering recent memories, loss of short-term memory. What is contralateral organization? The brain gets left individual field processed by the right side and vice versa. Contralateral organization. Brain gets left visual field processed by the right side. People with sleep deprivation tend to be more irritable and have poor attention and memory and are more prone to obesity. How did I say that? I actually got it right. That's crazy. Irritable, have more poor memory and attention, lead to obesity. Why does the fluid in the inner ear only flow in one direction? Because we have the semicircular canal that makes it so that the cochlea is separated into a lower and upper membrane. What is maladaptive coping techniques for stress? Techniques that will reduce the symptom while maintaining or even strengthening the actual disorder. Reducing symptoms, maintaining, strengthening the actual disorder. A delta fibers are the medium speed guys, and they have they're not very myelinated, and they have large, medium-sized diameters. Smaller diameter, less myelinated, medium speed. Okay. Why does more light hit the cones at the fovea and less? It's because at the fovea, all the cones get light, while at the periphery, only the cones get blocked by bundles of axons, so it lowers the energy of the incoming light wave. Divided attention is paying to two tasks at the same time, like multitasking. Hemisphere, we have the frontal cortex, which is the prefrontal cortex, and the motor cortex and Broca's area. We have the parietal cortex, which is the somatosensory, somatosensory cortex, and the spatial processing happens there. You have the occipital lobe, which contains visions, and it's also striated under a microscope. And we also have the temporal cortex, which is involved in sound and contains the Wernicke's area. Cones receive light. Receive detects color and discern high levels of detail. Cones detect color and discern high level of detail. Is it easier for one cell to send a projection to your brain or multiple cells to send a brain? It's easier for one cell to send a projection to a brain instead of thousands. Which two areas of brain with the most has the most glucocorticoid receptors? Hippocampus and frontal cortex has the most glucocorticoid receptors. Hippocampus and frontal cortex. The precursor to Korsakoff syndrome. Wernicke's encephalopathy, poor balance, mild confusion, and small memory loss. Wernicke's encephalopathy, poor balance, mild confusion, and small memory loss. What is the precursor to Korsakoff syndrome? Wernicke's encephalopathy, poor balance, mild confusion, small memory loss. Poor balance, mild confusion, small memory loss, Wernicke's encephalopathy. It's a primer to Korsakoff syndrome. Cool. I always miss this one. Rhodopsin changes shape and the phototransduction cascade can begin. When the retinal changes conformation. Rhodopsin changes shape and the phototransduction cascade can begin. Rhodopsin changes shape and the phototransduction cascade can begin. What does the central executive do? Central's executive coordinates the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonologic loop. Central executive coordinates the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonologic loop. Coordinates the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonologic loop. Overt orienting is a person turns all or part of their body to alter and maximize a sensory impact. For example, moving your ear to a sound source to better hear the sound. One of the major emotional response of stress is depression. The role of the hypothalamus in the limbic system regulates autonomic nervous system, endocrine system, hunger, sleep, thirst, sex. Regulates the autonomic nervous system, endocrine system, hunger, sleep, thirst, sex. Hypothalamus. So basically our primitive systems: autonomic, endocrine, hunger, sleep, thirst, sex. What are the three biases? Overconfidence, belief, perseverance, and confirmation bias. Overconfidence, belief, perseverance, confirmation bias. What is motivational interviewing? I'm just gonna review everything. Working with patients to find intrinsic motivation to change causes patients to engage in other treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy. Motivational interviewing. Working with patients to find intrinsic motivation to change causes patients to engage in CBT. Label line model. Each taste bud has 5 axons for each different taste, and they synapse on different parts of the gustatory cortex, taste cortex. We have phonology, morphology, semantics, pragmatics, and syntax. Walter Cannon argued that stressors like threats and danger trigger our fight or flight system. What are the 4 major categories of stress? We have catastrophic events, major life changes, daily stressors, daily hassles, ambient stressors, and daily hassles. Cone sees RGB, red, green, blue colors, and combination of them allows you to get different colors. Activation synthesis hypotheses. Brain gets lots of neural impulses in the brain, which is sometimes interpreted by the frontal cortex. Our brain during dreaming is only trying to find meaning of brain. Brain gets lots of random neural impulses in the brainstem, which is something to interpret. So during dreaming, we're only trying to find meaning from we get lots of new impulses in the brainstem. Impulses in the brainstem. So during dreaming, we're only trying to find meaning for random brain activity. Vigilance, attention, and signal detection, basically the priming of having a prime response for a faster response to a stimuli. Rods have quick recovery time, while cones slow recovery time, while cones have quick recovery time. But yeah, because rod sees color. Two main categories of long-term memory: episodic memory and semantic memory. Implicit, non-declarative, explicit, declarative. Implicit, explicit, long-term memory. What sort of relationship is observed between incremental threshold and a linear line? Incremental background intensity. Linear relationship. It's Weber's law. Incremental threshold. Linear relationship with this Weber's law. Syntax is how sentences are formed. The structure of sentences. How words are put together in sentences. Part of this layer pathways is spatial processing. Primary components is cones. Spatial resolution such as form and shape. It takes spatial resolution such as form and shape, and cones is a primary component. What is the role of rhodopsin in the phototransduction cascade? Rhodopsin is a protein located in rods. When light hits, some of the light hits rhodopsin, causes a retinal, a molecule inside rhodopsin, to change from bent to straight. Rhodopsin is a protein located in rods. Rhodopsin is a protein located in rods, and when light hits it, some of the light hits rhodopsin, causes the retinal to change from bent to straight. Rhodopsin is a protein located in rods. When light hits, some of the light hits rhodopsin, causes the retinal to change from bent to straight. Rhodopsin, protein located in rods. Light hits it. Light will hit rhodopsin and causes the retinal, which is a molecule inside rhodopsin, to change from bent to straight. Bent to straight. So when cGMP is bound to the sodium channels, the cGMP actually activates the sodium channels, so it allows it to keep the rods turned on. In the presence of phosphodiesterase, it actually converts cGMP to GMP. So we perceive a decrease in cGMP concentration. And because there's a decrease in cGMP concentration, the sodium channels can no longer stay open, so they close, causing the rods to turn off. State being aware of your surroundings. So Mayer Friedman and Ray Rosenman experiment conducted to test whether or not stress is correlated with heart disease. And so what they found was that people who had heart disease tend to be more angry. Early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease is loss of short-term memory, inability to remember recent events, loss of short-term memory. Contralateral organization is how visual stimuli on the right-hand side is perceived on the left hand, goes to the left side of the brain, and visual stimuli sensed on the left side of the eye goes to the right side of the brain. People with sleep deprivation tend to be more irritable, have poor memory and attention, and are more prone to obesity. At the center of the tongue. Most of the taste buds are concentrated in the anterior of the tongue, which is the front of the tongue. These are coping techniques that are that reduce the symptoms, but actually keep the actual disorder constant, or actually increase the problem of the disorder. Lazarus theory. Emotion is perceived only by how we cognitively label the emotion is how we cognitively label it based on cultural and individual differences. The situation is cognitively. Experience of emotion is depending on how the situation is cognitively appraised based on cultural individual differences. A delta fibers have small diameters, little myelin, and are medium speed. Korsakoff syndrome, lack of vitamin B1 or thiamine or intense alcoholism causes issue with forming new memories and recalling old memories, which is called anterograde and retrograde amnesia. Okay, retrograde amnesia. Caused by lack of vitamin B1 or thiamine or intense alcoholism, causes issue with forming new memories and recalling old memories, which is called anterograde retrograde amnesia. Cones detect color and discern high levels of detail. Selective attention, dividing your attention on one task between two tasks. Dividing your attention on one task between two. Oh, more like more. Dividing your attention on one task between two. Watching either TV or studying. Dividing your attention on one task. Okay. It's easier for one cell to send projection to a brain rather than multiple cells sending projection to a brain. Which two areas of our brain contains the most glucocorticoid receptors? The hypothalamus and the prefrontal cortex. Frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex. What are the Hans-Sells general adaptation syndrome? 3 phases of stress: alarm phase, resistance phase, exhaustion phase. Hans-Sells general adaptation syndrome says that we have 3 phases of stress: the alarm phase, resistance phase, and the exhaustion phase. Perceived control. Lack of perceived control is associated with higher stress. So usually people at the bottom of a hierarchy were more stressed because they sense a lack of perceived control. What is a precursor to Korsakoff syndrome? Precursor to Korsakoff syndrome is called Wernicke's instability. It's associated with mild confusion, memory loss, and loss of balance. When a retinal changes conformation, transduction with change shape, and a phototransduction cascade can begin. Rhodopsin changes and phototransduction cascade can begin. When is a signal a strong signal, and when is it a weak signal? A signal is a strong signal when hit is greater than miss. A weak signal is miss greater than hit. Central executive is what controls the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonologic loop. Overt orienting is moving your entire ear to the source of the sound. For example, if you're playing music on a speaker, you would purposely move your ear closer to the speaker to get a better sense of that stimuli. Trisman's attenuation theory. Instead of complete selective, we have an attenuator which weakens input from the unattended ear. So it goes sensory register, attenuator, perceptual process, and then conscious. Instead of complete selective filter, we have an attenuator which weakens input from the attendant ear. So we go sensory register, attenuator, perceptual process, and conscious. What is the role of the hypothalamus in the limbic system? So the hypothalamus is responsible for controlling the autonomic nervous system, and it's involved in autonomic nervous system and hunger, sleep, thirst, sex, and I forgot the other one, endocrine system, hormones. The 3 biases are Nikki, shut up! I'm studying, not talking to the microphone. I didn't know that. What are the 3 biases? The 3 biases are what? I'm talking to myself because I'm going through flashcards. You want to see how it works? What are the 3 biases? The 3 biases are confirmation bias. Overconfidence, belief, perseverance, confirmation bias. Overconfidence, belief, perseverance, confirmation bias. Overconfidence, belief, perseverance, confirmation bias. What is motivational interviewing? Motivational interviewing is interviewing a patient who is addicted to a drug where you're assessing him for intrinsic motivation to change, and this typically leads to cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. Walter Cannon argued that stressors like threats and danger trigger our fight or flight response. Trichromatic theory of color states that code detects 3 levels of color, RGB, red, green, blue, and we can mix those colors to produce other colors. The activation synthesis hypothesis states that during sleep, we get random signals from the brainstem, which is interpreted by the prefrontal cortex, and during dreaming, we're only trying to interpret these random bursts of signals. Rods have slow recovery time, while cones have faster recovery time because rods detect color, cones detect light. The 2 main categories of long-term memories: explicit memory, which is declarative, and implicit memory, which is non-declarative. What sort of relationship between incremental threshold and linear, which is Weber's law? The Yerkes-Dodson law. Bell-shaped curve: people perform best when they are moderately aroused with emotion. A bell-shaped curve, and people perform best when they are moderately aroused with emotion. It's a bell-shaped curve, and people perform best when they are moderately aroused with emotion. The parvocellular pathway is used to detect spatial processing, which is also controlled by the cones. Detecting spatial processing such as form and shape, and the main component is cones. Representative heuristic. People looking for the most representative answer to look and match a prototype, which is a given concept of what is typical and representative, kind of like stereotyping. People look for the most representative answer and look to match a prototype, a given concept of what is typical or representative. People look for the most representative answer and look to match a prototype, a given concept of what is typical or representative, kind of like stereotyping. Syntax is how we use words to form sentences. Rhodopsin. So rhodopsin is a protein that's located in the, I think it's in the cones. But basically, when light comes and hits the cones, some of the light will hit the rhodopsin, and rhodopsin will have a retinal molecule inside it, and retinal changes conformation from bent to straight. Night rods. When light hits, some of the light hits rhodopsin, causes the retinal change from bent to straight. The nativist perspective, Noam Chomsky approach on language development. Noam Chomsky. Children are born with the ability to learn language, and humans have a language acquisition device, LED, that allows them to learn language. This idea existed because all language shared a universal grammar, so LED allowed to pick up words quickly. So the language acquisition device allows me. Okay. What are the 2 components of sensory memory register? Iconic component, which is what you see and lasts for half a second. And the echoic component, which is what you hear and lasts for 3 to 4 seconds. What are the 5 sensory adaptations? Hearing, touch, smell, proprioception. Hearing, touch, smell, every sight, vision. Hearing, touch, smell. Hearing, touch, smell, sight. So everything but taste. Because taste is constant, I guess. Hearing, touch, smell, proprioception, sight. Most taste buds are located in the anterior of tongue, front of the tongue. Proactive coping, anticipating a difficult challenge and preparing how to cope with it. Conduction aphasia. What is conduction aphasia? Conduction aphasia is... I totally forgot. When the accruent fasciculus is broken, makes it hard to conduct listening and speaking activity because it disconnects Wernicke's area from Wernicke's area. When the accruent fasciculus is broken, which makes it hard to conduct listening and speaking activities. when our crude fasciculus is broken, which makes it hard to conduct listening and speaking activities. What happens if you destroy both sides of your amygdala? It causes Kluver-Bucy syndrome, which will result in hyperorality, hypersexual, and disinhibited behavior, which is doing actions without thinking about its consequences. It causes Kluver-Bucy syndrome, which will result in hyperorality, hypersexuality, and disinhibited behavior, which is not thinking about what your actions are going to do. Kluver-Bucy syndrome, when you destroy both sides of your amygdala. Parallel processing, detecting all information, color, form, motion at the same time. I know this one's a really big one. Detecting and focusing on all information, color, form, motion at the same time. Korsakoff syndrome. This is due to a deficiency in vitamin B1, or thiamine, or intense alcoholism, and this is where you actually forget old memories and unable to form new memories, which is called retrograde or anterograde and retrograde amnesia, respectively. Deficiency in vitamin B1 or thiamine causes issues with forming new memories from calling old memories anterograde and retrograde amnesia. Main symptom of depression. Anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure so you perceive more stressors. Main symptom is anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure so you perceive more stressors. Selective attention is dividing your attention on one of the two tasks, so for example, either watching TV or studying. Lazarus theory states that emotion depends on how we cognitively appraise a situation based on our cultural and individual differences. For example, some people like skydiving, other people don't like skydiving. Hans-Sells general adaptation syndrome. Alert phase, resistance phase, exhaustion phase, and stress. 3 phases of stress: alarm phase, resistance phase, and exhaustion phase. Perceived control. Lack of perceived control is known to lead to more stress, lead to people become more stressed. And this is evident in the fact that in the past, people who were lower on the hierarchy, so they have less, who they perceive to have less perceived control, and they are more stressful. When is the signal a strong signal? A strong signal is when hit greater than miss. A weak signal is when miss is greater than hit. 2 areas in most glucocorticoid receptors: hypothalamus and frontal cortex. Those are receptors that bind to glucocorticoid. Hippocampus. Dual coding hypotheses. Easier to remember words associated with images rather than either one alone. It is easier to remember words associated with images than either one alone. Easier to remember words associated with images. Okay. So I did 300. Just do a quick check how far we've done. 44 minutes today. Yeah, let's try to get through this more. What is the learning behaviorist B.F. Skinner theory of language development? Actually, I'm going to take a break for about 10 minutes. Recoup myself because I did go through 300. So maybe the next one I'll go down to 200, then 100, then home stretch. So we'll be right back.